Welcome back to our Washington, D.C. studio. I'm Brian Becker. I'm joined in our Washington studio by Brian Willson, Vietnam veteran, peace activist, human rights campaigner, and now an author of an autobiography, Blood on the Tracks. Brian Willson, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Tell us a little bit about this new book. I mean, people all over the country and certainly all over the world are aware that you've been relentlessly campaigning for peace for the past decades, many decades, 4 decades at least, perhaps 5. But why the title Blood on the Tracks?
Well, the title comes from, it didn't come from a Bob Dylan song, actually, album, but it came from the fact that I was blocking a munitions train that was carrying munitions to El Salvador in 1987 in California at the largest Pentagon weapons arsenal on the West Coast at this Concord, California Naval Weapons Station. And blocking actions, blocking the trains and the trucks that carry munitions parallel to the tracks was an old tactic of demonstrators at this base. So it wasn't unique. Not that they liked it, but you know, since the 60s there had been blocking actions at Concord when the weapons were going to Vietnam. So on September 1st, '87, I and 2 other veterans took our positions on the tracks, meaning between the rails, on the railroad ties, waiting for the first train that day. And the trains run every day on those tracks. We told the base commander we would be doing a 40-day water-only fast on the tracks starting September 1st with the motto, you can't move these munitions without moving our bodies, because we knew the munitions on that train were designed for one thing, to murder people in El Salvador and Nicaragua who, meaning these were death trains, these were murder trains. The commander refused to meet with us, but nonetheless we took our position up on September 1st. The first train came about 10 of 12. The train speed limit is 5 miles an hour. The penalty for obstructing movement of federal munitions train at that location was posted on a sign 15 feet from our vigil. 1 year in prison and a $5,000 fine. So we knew what the consequences were. First train was visible at 10 of 12 before noon. We took our positions. I was sitting in a lotus position. The other 2 veterans were between the rails, but they were on their feet, crouched. And I woke up 4 days later with no memory of what happened.
The train hit you?
The train ran completely over me, and it was the FBI identified from looking at the one video footage that was really a video footage that was going to document our arrests and any police abuse, captured something completely different. The train accelerating to more than 3 times its speed limit, according to the FBI, ran over me. One vet jumped straight to the left. The other vet jumped straight up vertically, did not leave the path of the train. He grabbed the cowcatcher railing, the railing that's over the platform, which is over the cowcatcher, where the 2 spotters on the front of the locomotive always stand, making sure the tracks are clear. Their hands are on that railing. The second vet that jumped straight up grabbed that railing, looked at the spotters who were shaking their head no. He jumped off, and he was the first person to my body, but I don't remember it.
So you were carrying out a civil disobedience action, actually, a protest, a vigil, yeah, an occupation in a way,
yeah,
of a train track where U.S. Pentagon munitions were being used to transport to a dock, to a port to be shipped out.
Correct.
And the train, rather than stopping, accelerated.
Which it always had done.
And it already stopped before. It accelerated, hit you. You lost both of your legs in that accident. And
it was not an accident.
Not in the, I'm sorry, I misspoke.
It was actually an attempted murder, as we've discovered.
Yes, I misspoke.
I can explain that why.
So, obviously, if the spotters saw you and the train accelerated, somebody made a decision that they were going to try to stop this vigil by using extreme violence, murder, right, in your case. And you woke up, and people all around the country, I remember, were shocked. They were horrified by what had happened to you. And there seemed to be an enormous outpouring of support. Rather than having the expected result of stopping the vigil, it seemed to gain more support. Is that right?
It certainly did. Let me backtrack for a second. I don't think what we were participating in was civil disobedience. I think it was civil obedience, because we called ourselves Nuremberg Actions. And I'm a lawyer by training, and I had studied the Nuremberg Principles that came out of World War II. And the Nuremberg Principles require anyone, not just a military person, anyone who knows of the criminal activities of one's government, to disobey illegal orders. In this case, the illegal orders were to run munitions trains that were going to kill people in Central America, and we had an obligation to stop the continuation of that criminal activity by blocking the movement of those munitions. So I call ourselves, we were upholding the Nuremberg Principles, which in the United States law is incorporated as supreme law of the land in the Constitution. Of course, we knew no judge or court is likely to acknowledge it, but we did want to spew the law back to the authorities. This is what the law says. So I woke up 4 days later, and on the day I woke up, on Saturday, September 5th, 9,000 people showed up at the tracks and ripped up 300 feet of the tracks with picks and shovels in their hands. The police just watched because there were too many people. Jesse Jackson showed up. Joan Baez showed up. Of course, I was just barely aware of this as I was waking up from this amnesia for 4 days. But from that point on, for 28 months, every day, day and night, every truck and every train was stopped by an encampment on the tracks with tents. Anywhere from 50 to 200 people at any one time at that site for 28 months. Now, of course, they got the weapons through, but not without having to stop every time and arrest hundreds of people. They actually arrested 2,100 people.
Let me
and
ask,
they broke 3 arms in the process.
Let me ask you, Brian, because I think it has relevance in terms of the historical continuity of people taking action. In your case, the government would label it civil disobedience. You say it's civil obedience because
I'm
you're
upholding the law,
conforming to the Nuremberg Principles that are ensconced in international and American law. And after this police violence, or the train violence, or the Pentagon violence, people gathered in larger numbers, and yet they could get the weapons through. We're witnessing a new kind of occupation movement that isn't limited, in fact, to just 10,000 or 9,000 people, but seems to have the potential to proliferate through all parts of society.
in the world.
And in the world. And tell me, from your point of view, as a peace activist, as somebody who has been campaigning for peace and against war and against militarism for so long, how do you feel about it? Where is it going?
Well, I don't know where it's going, but I'm pretty excited that it's happening. And it may go through all kinds of fizzle periods and then rekindling someplace else in other forms. I don't know. I've been to 12 Occupy sites now as I've been traveling around the country, maybe 13. I think this is the first time, maybe since the Wobblies were destroyed, the early aggressive labor activists in the early part of the 20th century, when they were wiped out basically by 1920s. They were so powerful in their advocacy for confronting capitalism and wanting to replace wage slavery with worker ownership. I think it may be the first serious effort or emergence of a movement that addresses class. Mm-hmm. Class is rarely ever thought of or addressed in this country. It's as if we don't have class. We have one of the most class-oriented societies on the planet. So I see the most powerful aspect of the occupation movement, not that it's just horizontal rather than vertical, and that they have general assemblies and every day and a modified consensus decision-making process. That itself is a change in the way people think of gathering and making decisions, but they're making the decisions in public spaces, in the street. There's no living room walls separating them from one another. There's no TV distracting them. They are actually congregating as a new community, wanting, I believe, to formulate a new paradigm out of the dysfunctionality of U.S. American culture. And most of the people I've been interviewing at the Occupy sites themselves come from very dysfunctional families, like many of us in the peace movement. But we've had to get our act together if we wanted to have a life of meaning and a life of that was constructively interacting in society at large to say something different about the way life could be. So I see the occupation movement as, there may be even a better word than occupation, but the fact that these people are in the gathering spontaneously everywhere. It's like a zeitgeist moment, you know. It's like it's like a rhizomatic movement. It's like all these rhizomes moving just under the grass and sprouting. Nothing top down. It's
the top down hierarchical forces of state repression are very involved right now. The mayor of Oakland just yesterday said that she was on a conference call with 18 other mayors who were talking about coordinating police assaults. And then we saw in Lower Manhattan, Zuccotti Park, Mayor Bloomberg with an army of police. I mean, thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of police shut down.
Very grotesque,
Occupy.
yeah.
But will it work? Will police repression in this instance disperse this movement? Are those public spaces that the protesters are being evicted from, are those critical to the growth of the movement?
Well, I don't think there's any way to stop the movement, actually, because it is a long overdue emergence of human spirit that says enough is enough. We can take repression for a certain period of time because we actually didn't even believe it was repression, perhaps, until neoliberal globalization has spread the egregious misery more intensively than ever before everywhere, and coming home to roost now as the gated community crowd wants to devour more of the commons. I think it has hit a tipping point. And I believe in archetypes. I believe that we deeply have embedded in our visceral memories, cellular memories, it's not in our brains, these archetypes of wanting, a yearning for freedom, empathy, cooperation, which is how we're wired to be socially cooperative. I think it's the emergence of something that's so deep. It can't, once it's accessed, it's like an irreversible knowledge moment, and how it formulates and morphs and forms may change a lot over the next few months and years, but the fact is it's happening everywhere. And in my view, it cannot be stopped, even though the form may look a little different. They may get dispersed. They may create hundreds more Occupy sites, which would be my recommendation, because as I've discovered in several of them I've been at, they're already getting too big. Can't have consensus decision-making when you get beyond a certain size. So have thousands of occupations, and I think that may conceivably happen.
Let me ask you about your view about economy and how the management of economy, because underneath it is this gross inequality, class polarization, class stratification. The chant of the Occupy movement is, we are the 99%, and also the banks got bailed out, we got sold out. Now, even as horizontal structures are created and as there's a new way of being, as you're discussing, there still is the question of how do you manage a modern economy. Credit finance is concentrated in fewer and fewer banks that have been determined to be too big to fail. They have control over the homes of 9 million people who are either foreclosed or threatened with foreclosure. Hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of students can't pay their student loans back to the banks, $1 trillion in owed money because they went to school. What about the banking system? What about the concentration of wealth? What's the alternative?
Well, I'm a decentralist and a bioregionalist. So, I mean, that just helps people understand that I try to look at things from a much very grassroots perspective that isn't in a centralized system or isn't thought of as a part of a centralized system. So, I think the ultimate antidote is we withdraw our support from the system and create our communities horizontally. Now that's maybe even an epistemological shift in the whole way we think about knowledge and the assumptions. But I don't think the system is at all sustainable, and I think it's actually the industrial capitalist system is on a collision course with life itself. The correction to that is collapse. And I think we should be facilitating the collapse by withdrawing our support. Cooperation, in a sense, will replace primary dependence on money. This is, if you will, a Neolithic model, which some people might laugh at, but we need a frame of reference for understanding what has been sustainable in our evolutionary history. The oil blip, of which we're all a product of, that are alive today, enabled all kinds of things to be happening, which determined our values, our habits, our patterns. The blip will not be repeated. So we will have a kind of a shock to rediscover what it means to be a human being. Now, in my case, I discovered when I was in Vietnam, I was looking at the bodies in 1 week of 700 to 900 murdered Vietnamese villagers. 60 or 70% were children. I knew at that point something was really severely wrong with the way I had been trained and the way I had been developed as a human being. And I knew that my job from that point on, I didn't exactly, or didn't clearly know it at the moment, but I knew I was on the wrong side.
You went to, in your book, Blood on the Tracks, which I would recommend to everyone to read, you talk about you went to Vietnam in the sort of late 1960s, I believe you were, when you went, one, an officer, and secondly, you were a fervent supporter in the cause of the U.S. Intervention in Vietnam, and then...
And a commander of 40 troops.
And you commanded troops. And then what, you talk in your book about the things that really shifted you and shifted you dramatically.
Yeah, I looked in the eyes of the Vietnamese people. They were dead on the ground. When the napalm had burned off their eyelids, they were all blackened. And I was in their village. I was from a farming village in upstate New York. I was in their farming village 9,000 miles away. And it struck me like a bolt of lightning. I know it's shameful that it took me so long. I was 27. It struck me that these people were my family. Mm-hmm. I'm telling you, this is literally how I experienced it. And I couldn't believe I was participating in killing them. And so from that point, that was an irreversible moment. I couldn't put it back in the neat little box. And so from that point on, I pretty much studied the history of archetypes because I wanted to know where this feeling came from. Mm. So I studied Jung, I studied quantum physics, I studied evolutionary biology. I wanted to know how a typical kid like me, who was considered a good kid, everybody loved me in my town in the 50s. How could a good kid follow an order to do something so criminally insane? So I had to study, or I was motivated to study archetypes as to how I came to this sense that these people were my family. I know it may be a no-brainer for a lot of people. It was not a no-brainer for me. Mm-hmm. And I studied archetypes for 20, 30 years. I'm still really studying. It means the basic human characteristics that enabled mammals becoming hominids and bipedal species, and what we call modern man, the fundamental characteristics that enabled us to get this far on our evolutionary branch, not just as yearning for freedom and autonomy, but empathy and cooperation, which ties all human beings together. That's what I think is happening even in the Occupy movement.
Yeah.
It's coming
so
up.
I want to come back to Vietnam just for a moment, because for people your generation, perhaps my generation, Vietnam was a transformative moment. You as a veteran, others who weren't veterans but who came to a great transformation because of the massive killing. You were part of the U.S. Air Force, and you describe in your book what the human toll was of the bombing in Vietnam. And I think most people today, Vietnam becomes sort of a brand word or a slogan or something without meaning. But what was, as an Air Force personnel, as an officer, what did you see about the toll taken from the air bombing in Vietnam? Because it's quite amazing as you describe it in the book.
Well, I was 27 when I was in Vietnam, still pretty naive. I confess, I was pretty naive. I grew up in a fundamentalist Republican family, and I was a jock, so I was I knew that we were in the McCarthy period and the communists were everywhere, and I was just kind of doing I was a good student and a good athlete, so that was most important for me. So naive. I witnessed in 1 week, I witnessed 5 villages being bombed, or I witnessed the after effects of the bombings within an hour after the bombings, and somewhere between 700 and 900 murdered Vietnamese villagers in that 1 week. And first I thought it must be a mistake, and then I went to Saigon to meet with our intelligence office. I said, I want to look at all the bombing reports from Vinh Long province the last week or two. So they showed that they were destroying numerous VC units, VC meaning Viet Cong, which was our enemy, as we said in Vietnam. It was our enemy. I was told they were our enemy. A derogatory term itself for the National Liberation Front. The intelligence office said, these units are being wiped out pretty systematically. The whole Delta practically was a free fire zone, meaning that in the minds of the GIs, we could shoot anything, bomb anything, kill anything that moved. The intelligence office said we were perplexed because these same identifiable VC units that were supposedly destroyed in these various bombings appear again several days later in other locations, and we don't quite understand it. I said, here's the explanation. I was still naive, but I was coming out of it fast. Mm-hmm. I said, you're bombing villages to get the body counts. It's real easy. They're turkey shoots. These are undefended villages. The bombs come in. The bombers are coming in at 300 and 350 feet in midday, broad daylight. They can see what they're hitting. They're gleefully bombing these villages to get the body counts. And so I said, this is an intentional policy of genocide. And the intelligence officer I was talking to actually said, I never thought of that. Well, I had never thought of it before either.
So,
until I was in those villages and went to look at those bombing reports.
Because we only have a couple minutes left, I want to take that thought, it had never occurred to him that this was genocide. It had never occurred to you, but you were explaining what you were observing, what you were seeing, what you could make out. And then just jump ahead in our last couple minutes, because this policy of endless war, which seemed to start, at least in a pronounced way, after September 11th, has continued. There was the invasion of Panama.
Much longer pattern than that, though, of course.
And what about Iraq and Afghanistan? The U.S. thought that they would be able to, the Bush administration thought they would just blow away Afghanistan and Iraq because of superior forces. But that, like Vietnam, hasn't happened either.
Well, they don't understand human nature. They don't understand when you maim people, murder people, displace people from firepower, people don't like it. Just as we wouldn't like it if it was happening to us. Remember the golden rule that we learned in Sunday school? It's actually similar in every religion. You treat others as you want to be treated. What a simple concept. Well, in capitalism and imperialism, you can't afford to treat others as you would want to be treated because you need to steal their stuff. You need to steal their resources. You have to demonize them to justify taking it by force. People don't like being treated that way. Thank God there's archetypes inside us, beneath our ideological training, that says my survival, your survival requires cooperating with other people horizontally, not in hierarchical fashion. And we resist when somebody treats us this way. We organize. And of course, the United States is so arrogant. We think of ourselves as so exceptional. You know, really, we're exceptionally stupid. We're also exceptionally demonic. And so it disables us from truly understanding the consequences of our policies. And of course, now the policies are driven by the fact that the military, industrial, congressional, presidential, banking, insurance complex makes the money on wars. That alone is enough incentive for them to continue. And of course, the corporations that are involved in all this profiting own the political system. That's why I'm suggesting people no longer look to the political system, but withdraw support and recreate a new society from below.
We have 15 seconds, short time. Do you see the movement dynamically connecting the issue of militarism and the economic, social questions at home? Is that happening amongst young people?
Yes, it is. Every place I've been in having these discussions in 12 Occupy sites, they're all making the links.
Thank you very much. We're here with Brian Willson, his new book, Blood on the Tracks. I hope everybody gets it. It's sold out, but it's coming back into print soon. Brian Willson, thanks so much.
Thank you.
And we'll see you next time.